how do you think, slicing of work can help organizations obviously become more flexible and adaptable?
Mhm.
And do you think there are certain misconceptions around slicing of work that people avoid doing it?
Hmm. So for most projects that I come along by and I work with, this kind of splitting is not so self-understood as with the food, right? So it's really hard to figure out. And most projects that I work with, actually, when I ask this question, so what is going to be the result of your work, and how will you know that it's actually moving the needle anyhow? We end up identifying maybe 2 or 3 increments
Correct.
throughout a whole project that takes several years.
Why feedback is important in the context over here,
Mhm.
and or maybe let's start with why do you think that feedbacks are important within the context?
Right. So generally, whatever gets feedback gets improved, right? So if we say we are adaptive or agile, well, we need to kind of adapt to what, right? So the whole idea of inspection is getting some kind of feedback. Getting feedback isn't simple. Um, because it's simple to get positive feedback. If you know that everything you're gonna hear is positive, that's okay. That's,
Correct.
I guess, easy to take. Sometimes if it's very honest positive feedback, it's not even that's not easy. But getting negative feedback is the hard part.
Feeling the pressure of large and complex work items in your agile projects, breaking down work into manageable chunks can be key to delivering value faster and adapting to change. Today, we will be exploring the concept of slicing work with Anton Skornyakov, who has written a book on that concept. We'll discuss practical techniques for struggling work effectively, leveraging feedback for continuous improvement, and prioritizing for maximum impact. This episode is packed with actionable insights for agile coaches, scrum masters, product owners, and developers looking to optimize their work and embrace a more flexible approach. Passionate about Agile and Scrum, Anton is a certified Scrum trainer. Anton's dedication to organizational collaboration and Agile principles in the public and non-profit sector led him to his current role as co-founder and managing director of Agile. In his capacity, he has coached nearly 100 organizations and thousands of individuals in the art of slicing work. Anton is also the author of the upcoming book, The Art of Slicing Work: How to Navigate Unpredictable Projects, which encapsulates the culmination of numerous stories, lessons, and principles gathered throughout his coaching journey. So, without further ado, let's slice the work.
Hello, Anton. Welcome to the podcast by Agile Coaching Roundtable. It's a great pleasure having you on our show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, Ramya, and hello, Vivek. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so we are really excited to have this conversation with you today on your upcoming book, The Art of Slicing Work. So we would, so that is the topic that interests most of the agilists, if I may say so, or agile practitioners, because that is one such piece which people really struggle with. And we thought it would be a great conversation to have so that our listeners and maybe viewers can have some directions and guidance in how do we slice the work. So to begin with, what I want to just check is maybe what inspired you to come up with this book, and if you
Hmm.
can just talk a little bit about your book for our audiences.
Sure, sure. Thank you for this question. So I'm a Scrum trainer and a coach. So I very often meet with different organizations and different people who, in some form, in one form or another, are dealing with unpredictable projects or unpredictable things that they are building. And in fact, a lot of people that I come to deal with do not have a background in software. So some of them are from governmental entities, some of them are from nonprofits, or some of them are from companies who actually do develop software, but they are not people. They have not never dealt with software before. And I mean, like everyone else in our industry, people, what I notice is people have a lot of questions like, who should be responsible for this, or how should we, structure our work? What do we do when people have conflicts? And all of these questions are, in their particular moment, important. However, I find that most of the time when you just jump onto such a question, like how should you structure something or who should be responsible, you can have a very long, detailed theoretical discussion that is maybe interesting, to philosophically, but is actually not really pragmatic and it's not really helpful. And it changes whenever we are able to switch our attention and to focus our attention to what are the actual results that we will deliver, that and not just some results that we'll deliver, but the results that we will deliver that can be checked, can be verified, can be tasted by a client or by an outsider, someone we are building whatever it is that we are building it for. Because once we focus our attention onto, well, in this 2 weeks time we want to build this, and then we ask ourselves the question of how should the teams be structured, or who should be responsible for that. Very often the question comes immediately, and it is useful in this particular question, in this particular situation. And in a different situation, the answer to this general question would be very different. So in my experience, this focus on those slices is, and we, I can talk a little bit more about what I call slicing if you're not yet familiar with it, but the focus on the slices is what makes a lot of everything else, all of the other questions, so much clearer, so much easier to answer, so much easier to work, to makes everything so much more pragmatic. I guess that's
okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think yes, we that makes sense. But I think would you like to talk in the context of what slicing over here
Mhm.
means?
Mhm.
Is it the work slicing? Is it beyond work? What exactly are you
Mhm.
referring to when you're saying slicing?
So let's take a real example. Let's make it really concrete, okay? Let's make a very simple example. I'm starting just to to connect people wherever they come from. I'm just using this very simple example of preparing a meal. Imagine you have something bigger to prepare. You've invited, I don't know, 20 friends to your house, and you have this big project in front of yourself to prepare the food for all of your guests. And then
Correct.
you ask yourself, well, how do I divide up this work? Because it's a little bit too big. You cannot just start and do it, right? You have to divide it. And there are basically two principally different, two very fundamentally different ways to break it up. Well, the one way is to think, oh, well, what do we need? We need some entrees, we need some main courses, maybe we need some desserts, we need some drinks. And then you think, okay, what kind of guests do I have? Maybe I have some people who are vegans, some people who are vegetarian, some of them definitely really want to eat meat. And then I'll think about the different desserts, different main courses, and different and so forth. What in the end, what I will have is a whole list of the dishes, of the different things that people can taste. Now, what I've just done while telling this short story is I've vertically sliced the job of preparing the dinner, right, into the dessert, main
Absolutely.
courses, and then the different, right. Another way of approaching this thing is to say, well, what are all the things that we need to do in order for this meal to be ready? And then you come up with all the different vegetables that you need to clean and to peel and to prepare, and all the different meats that you have to prepare, and all the different things that you need to do. Now, this first one is called vertical slicing. The second list of all those actions is the list of kind of horizontal pieces of work. Horizontal and vertical comes, the metaphor is actually from a cake, but basically you need several horizontal steps in order to achieve one dish. And when you now it's a very simple example because so that everyone can easily understand it. But now that we have this established, we can think about, well, what happens, for example, if I want to if I want to have an overview of what is going to be on the table, want to check whether the final result is actually looks good or not, I will definitely look at the vertical list, right? What happens if my guests suddenly appeared 3 hours earlier because their flight gets I don't know, pushed on, and suddenly I don't have the time that I thought I would have to prepare the meal? What of the lists does help me to change the scope? Again, it's the vertical list. And now there is a more interesting thing where we can get deeper into everything that is connected to agile coaching is what happens when I delegate different pieces of this lists. If I, for example, in my family, if we prepare something like that, and I have a couple of kids, so one of them is 10, would I give them the task to fry potatoes? Would I tell them, could you please make this dish? Well, I wouldn't. Typically, they're not yet good enough for that. I mean, they could try, but it very probably I wouldn't want to offer this dish to my guests after that, right?
Actually.
So to them, I would ask, I guess, could you peel these potatoes, please? Right? An horizontal task. Now, this is very simple understanding, but it has very far-reaching implications, because if I ask someone to peel the potatoes, how do I check the quality? I look at the potato and look, is it peeled well or not, right? If we transfer this to actually working with software, what does it mean? If I give someone a horizontal task, for example, could you please change this backend model so that it, I don't know, has 2 more variables saved in them? Or could you please adapt this API so that it now responds to changes the response to this or this request? In order to check whether this job has been done well, I need to be able to actually look into the code and understand what it means to, change them all, to program, right? So in order to check the quality of something that is horizontal, I need to be an expert for this. While if I ask someone to create those fried potatoes, what do I need in order to check the quality there? I just need to taste it, right?
Wow,
So
brilliant.
right, so it's actually very obvious, kind of, but it has very far-reaching implications, because in our work that we normally do in organizations, this work is way more complicated than cooking potatoes, right? So but understanding these fundamental principles, you can even understand them with this easy example. And then, just to give you a hint of what happens then, like, imagine what about responsibility, right? We have the responsibility process and how difficult it is to get people actually on the same page within an organization. Well, what happens, I don't know what happens with me when I'm giving the task of, for example, cutting a tomato for a dish. I would typically ask, well, how thin do you want me to cut it, right? And the response from my partner would be, well, how thin do you like them? Yeah, you know what kind of dish we're cooking, so how thin do you like it, right? So what happens in this very small conversation is basically me saying, I don't feel responsible for the whole dish. You are responsible for it. Why don't you tell me how thin you want it? And then she answering, well, why don't you feel responsible for the whole thing? Why don't you think along with me? And that very natural thing that happens I would say I've seen it in almost every household, right? It shows you exactly what we are dealing with when we have organizations in large projects that are basically sliced horizontally, where we have a huge amount of tasks, huge amounts of details, where people talk about how they want some action to be performed, and people not feeling responsible for the end result. Right. So the ability. So I'm going to to close this long monologue now. But the ability of an organization to actually split up a big project into very small chunks is vital for everything else that we need when we're trying to establish agility. And it is very basic, and for many people who have been practicing agile coaches for 10 years or more, this thing is a subconscious skill that we all have. But what I come to understand is that most people who are new to being adaptable, being agile, this is not a self-understood thing. And just talking about
Correct.
how they basically structure work is already kind of the key for most people to understand it. And so when I talk to people who don't deal with software at all, I just talk about this part. And from there, you can derive almost all of Scrum and all of everything. And that's basically what the book is about. The book is basically deriving. I'm not talking about Scrum at all in the book. Just somewhere in the
Yeah.
beginning, I saying I haven't invented it all by myself. It's just Scrum stuff. But from now on, I'm gonna start talking about it, and we're just gonna talk about real examples and real world examples of a
Mhm.
government agency that is slicing a project that would normally take a long time, much thinner, and nonprofits, and then I just give people principles on how to do that.
Yes. And you also mentioned, in terms of ability of an organization to break down or split the work into smaller chunks to be more agile, or that was what I could take it out from the conversation. And
Mhm.
since you mentioned about the organization, how do you think slicing of work can help organizations obviously become more flexible and adaptable? And
Mhm.
do you think there are certain misconceptions around slicing of work that people avoid doing it? Now again, as you mentioned, the example that you gave related to cooking, maybe that
Mhm.
was the smallest piece of work, right?
Mhm.
Which we could relate to, or it was quite relatable. But when we
Mhm.
come to the
Mhm.
organization, when there are larger group of people working
Mhm.
together, how do you think
Mhm.
this can be more successful doing it?
Hmm. So for most projects that I come along by and I work with, this kind of splitting is not so self-understood as with the food, right? So it's really hard to figure out. And most projects that I work with, actually, when I ask this question, so what is going to be the result of your work, and how will you know that it's actually moving the needle anyhow? We end up identifying maybe 2 or 3 increments
Correct.
throughout a whole project that takes several years. So people would work for a year on something, and only after a year they would find out whether something is useful or not. So maybe let's take a project that is more relatable to software industry and maybe more relatable to people. So there is this one famous project where, like several decades ago, in a city in Europe, they wanted to implement a system, an informational system for that shows basically when the buses arrive, right? So they have a lot of buses, and there is bus stations, and each bus station has some kind of a display, an old style display, not a real, not a real monitor, and everything has been decided on the hardware. Let's make it simple. And it's just there's a team or several teams that they want to build the software that will, in the end, show the number of the bus on the bus, show when the bus is arriving at the station, like bus 123 is arriving in 9 minutes, 8 minutes, and so forth, right? So this is a several years project. It's huge. What do these guys create in the first week? Like, how can they show after 1 week that something has been done and this thing is vertical and not just a concept? Because when I ask this question or when I observe this in most organizations, the first result will be, well, a lot of system architects will get together and they will discuss about what the architecture will look like, and the product of this work will gonna be PowerPoint, showing a very fancy architecture, right?
Correct.
And then after a couple of weeks of negotiation, they will think and figure out what kind of technology they want to use, and then they're gonna get some management, and they're gonna get management agreement, and maybe after a couple of months, they're gonna have an architecture that is fixed. Now, all of that has nothing to do with agility. So what these guys did actually was, after a week, they could show a hello world on one particular hardware. Now you could ask, why does it take them for a whole week to create a hello world, right? It's normally something you create in a couple of minutes. The reason for this is because for this hello world, it's basically showing hello world on this interesting monitor which has this huge pixels and which is not a normal, normal monitor that you would normally program. Um, and basically with this, they were able to show that this hard-coded um, words appear on the monitor, and the clients could see, oh, well, this is how much space we have there. This is how much information we can display there. This is what it looks. And in the second week, they were able to show bus number 123, it arrives in 10 minutes, 9 minutes, 8 minutes. But all of this data does not come from real buses. It's just hard coded. But it's more intelligent now. And then the next step, it's coming from, this data is coming from kind of mocked data for one particular bus. It's not real, but it's actually really calculated. And then the next way, it's actually coming from one concrete bus. But it's only showing, and what I'm just describing to you is a pattern that's actually, as far as I know, it's been established by Alistair Coburn, one of the signees of the Agile Manifesto. It's called walking skeleton, right? And in software world, we actually have this kind of patterns. We have, so many extreme programming practices, and all of them are actually useful when it comes to getting value from technological point of view. But when we are building when we are changing processes, for example, when we talk about an agency that is digitalizing, or when we talk about changing processes within a company that, like one of the examples that I'm using in the book is a bakery chain, right? The risk is not only in the technical approaches, so we cannot just take those tools that we have in the software world and use and just copy paste them outside of the software world. We need some other more generalized approaches. So I'm not sure, Vivek, was I able to give more example that is more relatable to what you said?
No, I completely got the context over here. Yes, over to you, Ramya.
Yes, and when you spoke about, there were so many things that I connected with. So first is you spoke about maybe the slicing of work is something that does not come naturally to the people or developers or organizations, and I completely agree to that. The reason why I'm saying this is, for an example, if I go to any project, say for agile adoption, or maybe helping teams to learn how to do maybe how to deliver value using agile ways of working, be it scrum or be it just an agile practices. So first thing that obviously, we do training, coaching, etc., and then when we actually try to coach them onto the project, first thing that they ask is, okay, we say that we are using certain tools, right? How do we even break down our entire project into different requirements? Maybe this could be a large requirement. For an example, what people ask me is, okay, how do we decide what could be our epics, what could be our features, and what could be our user stories? That's the classic question that I get every single time. And
Yes.
what they try to do is, as you rightly mentioned, they try to do it horizontally. And the example that you gave is that just kind of a peeling a potato, right? So what they try to do is they create activities that they want to work on, and they put it as a work item. So what happens with that is, this is just an activity. How are you going to measure it? Or for an example, if the client wants to understand or want to validate whether this works or not, how are you going to show that activity? For an example, just setting up a database. How is client going to, as an end customer, how is that person going to validate that a database is being set, right? So this is the classic problem that people get, and I'm glad that you are addressing that problem in the book. So I just want to understand. So since we know that it does not come naturally to people, we have to coach them and we have to train them in slicing the work. So when we say that it comes naturally to them, which means that for me, they are self-organizing, right? So when we are supporting them, they are not really into a self-organization mode, but till then they figure out that they are self-organizing, we need to help them out, right? So why is self-organization so important in this scenario?
Right. So let me connect it to because self-organization means different thing for different people. So let me maybe connect it to another very quick example. So self-organization for me is more like you know there is a roundabout in a street, right? And cars just automatically enter, and everyone has to pay attention when he enters a roundabout, and that's basically how a self-organized crossing works. Or you can
Okay.
have a traffic lights, right? A system where
Correct.
that requires energy that you need to program and so forth. So if you have self-organization, it's like you have a lot of roundabouts in your organization, and people are figuring out on their own what it is best that they can do. Now, in order for self-organization to work, there are several preconditions, but the main kind of hard skill precondition is that people understand what the result of their work should be. If they
Wow.
don't, they cannot. I've seen it so often. For example, in a it's again a very simplified example, but maybe, well, no, the thing that you just described, Ramya, I also totally get it, right every time. So how do I get, is this an epic, is this a user story? What people get very often into, they want to start working, right, and they are focusing on those little things, but and those little things will matter at some point, but if you only focus on them, you won't see the forest for the for the woods, right? You for the trees. You basically, you see, you don't get the whole picture, and you need to have, or at least someone needs to have a big picture. The person who, who basically pays for the project or is responsible for it to be successful, they at least need to have this big picture. And the big picture needs to be detailed enough so they can actually drive it in any direction. Now, let's come back to self-organization. Um, so in order for me to say, hey guys, could you please deliver something in a self-organized manner, I need to describe what it is that they will that I will get in the end. And then the
Correct.
guys, girls can figure out on their own what to do with all of their skills. If no one gives them that, or even worse, if someone asks them, could you please make a database that does this and that exactly in the same way you just proposed, then what they're going to do is they're going to just do the database, right? Like I was just cutting the tomatoes, and they will ask, well, how thin do you want them to be cut? Like, what do you want in my database to be there? Do you want this field there or that field there? And I don't want to think about that. I don't. So when I say I don't, I mean the people actually finding out whether the organization is on the right track. They don't want to be giving people directions on what fields the database should have or not. That's for an
Correct.
expert to figure out, right? So that is why I find the slices kind of, it is actually a detailed thing, right? So a lot of people talk about the why being the most important question to ask, and I agree. The why is a very important question to ask, but it typically is not something that creates connection between everyone involved in the work. The discussion about those slices is what creates connection. What connects the understanding of the top management to from top management to the person actually working on the job, actually changing the database or creating a new one or migrating it, right? So this connection is created by them agreeing on what will I see when this thing is done. Yeah, and I guess this is where the connection to self-organization comes through. So many organizations I see are basically failing in self-organization because the things that they are asking people to do are peeling the potato or
Correct.
doing the database, right? And then it compounds because what happens when you are peeling the potato and you're getting feedback. Let's say we have a great organization and they have a great culture of giving each other feedback. So I get feedback on how I peel the potatoes. What skill am I improving at? I'm becoming a great potato peeler, right? Maybe there's nothing wrong with that, but I will never become the guy who starts thinking about the whole fried potato thing, right? I will never be the guy who
Yes.
starts thinking about the whole dish. I will only become a great peeler of potatoes or, designer of databases.
Mhm. Mm, yes. And
Mhm.
as you were mentioning, it's more important of establishing, in a certain way, the connections uh, in the work or in the way that they are doing things. And also, while you also mentioned is like the feedbacks that they get or the feedbacks that are given to them, right? Uh,
Mhm.
so why or how does feedback or maybe why feedback is important in the context over here,
Mhm.
and or maybe let's start with why do you think that feedbacks are important within the context?
Right. So generally, whatever gets feedback gets improved, right? So if we say we are adaptive or agile, well, we need to kind of adapt to what, right? So the whole idea of inspection is getting some kind of feedback. Getting feedback isn't simple. Um, because it's simple to get positive feedback. If you know that everything you're gonna hear is positive, that's okay.
Correct.
That's, I guess, easy to take. If sometimes if it's very honest positive feedback, it's not even that's not easy. But getting negative feedback is the hard part, right? And receiving and providing negative feedback is hard because first of all, when you are dealing with environments where agility is needed,
Mhm.
you know that typically only 10 to 20% of what we do is actually useful. And 80% is actually maybe to a small extent, maybe to a large extent, but somehow not what we needed. And if you never get negative feedback, well, guess what? You basically leave all those crap behind, and you leave it within the product that you're building. And if you never get feedback, well, what you have is a big pile of those 80% things that you do,
You'll
right?
be in a delusion if you
Yeah,
don't get a negative feedback sometimes.
yeah. And getting negative feedback is hard. And in or and there are a couple of good strategies that I also describe in the book on how to basically teach your organization and how make it less stingy to receive negative feedback. Just to call it out, there is a structure. It was created by Dave Snowden that is very good at this. It's called ritual dissent, where people basically ritually destroy an idea or ritually destroy a concept or something that has been created. And you basically collect all of those negative parts. There's a little bit more involved in that, but if you Google, you'll find enough. And there is a lot of value in getting feedback. And as we just mentioned, this is very connected. What is it that you're getting feedback on? Because
Correct.
I guess this idea is I mean, it's very simple to understand. You need to have slices, but how do you get to them? That's the hard part. And I find it very people are easily convinced that slices make sense, but then once work starts, what Ramya just described happens. People says, so where do we start? So how do we do it? So how do we get
Absolutely.
the first one, right? So how do I get my hands? So how can I actually even imagine it? And if you bring someone, if you are, say, a product owner and you're not empowered yet to really make most decisions, but you are able to create 30 slices out of a project that would otherwise only have two different deliverables, you are doing a great job for your stakeholders. You can bring them those 30 things and just say, well, do you want me to deliver this one thing and you have no idea for half a year or what's going to happen? Or do you want me to have this 30 steps where you can actually check something? And from the way I'm asking you, typically the reaction is, well, that's great. We would like to have those 30 different stages to adapt. And there you are. Like, so to your question, Vivek, so how does it help us to be adaptive? Without us having those slices, we will not have this moment of when the feedback is given. And that's why defining it, that's why the whole, the whole book is about the art of slicing. It's basically the crafts of how do I come up with those little slices that we can deliver within a couple of weeks.
Absolutely. And also, one of the reasons why I feel this slicing is also important is, see, I know that not everyone applies or maybe implements Scrum to the T. So if we just talk about Scrum, so what
Absolutely.
they
Yeah.
do is they also come up with the concepts of Sprint Zero, and they use
Hmm.
it as a preparatory sprint wherein they'll just get their maybe setup done, infra done. As you rightly mentioned, they'll just come up with saying that hello world put up on the this thing,
Hmm.
right? So in your example, so maybe
Hmm.
if we have our slicing of work done in an effective manner, maybe we
Mhm.
know that in the first sprint itself, what are the things that we may want to work on based on the priority and the sprint goal, obviously. And whatever
Mhm.
activities that we list down with the incorrect slicing as a part of the user story, what people will do is in the attempt to get that particular work item done, all these
Mhm.
activities of setting up the infra or maybe getting onboarded on the other preparatory things would also be taken care. Instead of maybe listing your work items in the form of activities or the vice versa, having your
Mhm.
slicing in an effective manner will help you take care of all those things as a prerequisites while you actually get something done productive in the form of sprint or product increment.
Mhm.
Am I
Yeah.
correct in maybe saying this?
Well, so I'm not sure I've got you completely because the internet connection was a little bit off at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay.
what I definitely can confirm is that most organizations they don't care about Scrum, and I actually don't think they should. To be honest, Scrum
Yes.
is
Yes.
something that we agile coaches should care about, but they should care about getting results done. And 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 something that you just said is when we know what the result of our work will be, even
Yes.
if we don't get everything else from Scrum right, if we are able to deliver or we are not able to deliver something of value, that is basically the main question that we want to
Correct.
answer in the end of our iteration. And if we do that from my point of view, that's the main part. Like if we are able, however we are organized, whether we are working in teams or not, yes, there is so many ways to fail, right? We don't even want to get into them. I'm sure
Correct.
we all know hundreds of them. But if we are able to actually deliver something of value and learn from that, that is real progress. And with all of the other pains and failures aside, if we do that, we are on the right track. And I can tell you so many times I've seen organizations that have been doing Scrum by the book, and they actually have done all the meetings, all the roles were well defined. People, it looked like a well-oiled machine. But
Correct.
they were not really working on vertical slices. They were not really getting feedback. They were only playing this internal game where the team presents something to some fake stakeholders who give some fake feedback. And I can tell you, they are out of market right now because for several years they were just not learning whether what they're doing is valuable. So you can, from my point of view, you can fail at everything else, but if you do this thing right, you will be on the right track, while you can do everything else right and still fail. That's
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah.
And also, see, when we say that we are doing Scrum or whether we are doing Agile or whatever framework, whatever we may want to do, ultimately
Mhm.
we are doing to deliver value to the customer, right? And
Mhm.
the only way to deliver value to the customer is maybe having, I mean, breaking down the entire chunk into smaller pieces, and then maybe picking up one piece at a time and then delivering and seeking feedback. So that's the crux of why we are doing be it agile or be it scrum or be it kanban or whatever, right? So I completely
Mhm.
understand your point when you say that
Mhm.
even if you don't get scrum or any agile ways of working right, but even if you get this right, you would be able to deliver value to the customer because the customer is interested in that.
Yeah.
So typically maybe what I tell maybe teams is that customers will not care, or maybe if you are a customer and if you want to buy a product, uh,
Mhm.
do you buy a product because the product is good, useful, or do you buy because you are doing scrum or maybe it is built on scrum or agile or kanban or whatever, right? Customers really
Mhm.
don't care. What they
Mhm.
care is whether we are getting the product right or not, and if we are delivering value at every sprint or maybe incrementally, that's what we care for, right? And I think
Mhm.
yes, slicing would help achieving or delivering the values, right?
Mhm.
So maybe what I want to just move towards is about helping organization on predictability, right? So how can organizations prepare for unpredictability in their work structures? And how
Mhm.
can slicing work help organization become more adaptable in the
Mhm.
face of unpredictability?
Mhm. So there is the big approach, and there is some little small parts of it. So the big approach, I don't think we will have enough time to get into this. I will just give some kind of buzzwords that I typically would use myself in workshops. Basically, what we need is some kind of a mapping, some kind of a visualization of what it is that we are trying to do, and I typically use impact mapping for that. That's one of the, from my point of view, of the most versatile tools that is available, and I basically explain in the book a little bit more about how it works, also completely outside of software. And once we mapped what we are going to do, and we need to map it from a point of view of a customer. We do not map the internal architecture. That's not what we are mapping. What we are mapping are the different things that we think the customer will do with whatever we are building. And once we've done that, and we maybe do it for half an hour, at least in the first go, we then ask ourselves, what can go wrong? We actually go into this negative thinking for a certain time-boxed amount of time, and we think about everything that we've mapped out, and we go through these things, and we think, well, imagine our project has really failed on all possible ways. How could this part have failed? How could this part have failed? How could this part have failed? And we collect a lot of potential failures, and some of them will be fake. Just because we ask ourselves how can we fail, we can sometimes come up with ways that no one really thinks are real. But some of those failure scenarios, they will really hurt. We will really think, oh well, this actually could happen. This could actually happen. Oh my God. And then basically what we have is we have a list of risks that are critical and probable enough that we should take care of them. And when we have that, what we then can do is we can ask ourselves, what result can we produce and test in the real world that will show us that this risk isn't there anymore? It's very, you could say, lean startup kind of thinking, but with this general approach, it works in so many other situations other than startups as well. So just take the risks and basically think, what is the result that we need to produce in order to check that this risk isn't there anymore? And this is kind of a very simplified approach to what I've just done, just taking the risks and thinking about the results. It works also with small projects, like if you have a new garden and you wanna put different kind of vegetables in that, and then you're thinking, so what am I gonna do? Think about the risks. How will you be able to mitigate them? And what do you want to create? And with this approach works with so many different in so many different organizations. And the nice thing about it is it works pretty well for people who are not involved in the process of writing software or creating whatever it is you do, because the managers that are paying for any kind of project, they're actually quite worried about the risks. They're typically quite aware of them. So if you are asking them, what are the risks, you are on their level, you are speaking their language. That's very helpful when you're in such an
that's an amazing
adoption.
tip.
Yeah. Thank you. Right. So yeah. I'm not sure how deep I want to go in our podcast, but basically the idea is that if you try to slice work, there is basically four big you could say places where you could slice. The first one is you could think about whom are you actually trying to improve something for, and you can narrow this group down tremendously by location, times, and depending on what you do, you can narrow it down. And by narrowing it down, very often you find that you can deliver something within a couple of weeks already that is useful. Second thing, if you narrow it down, it's still too big. What you can do is you can take and kind of look into all those different impacts that you want to have on this narrow group. So maybe you want them to be like, if those are guests for my dinner party, maybe I want them to actually be fed and to be full, but then also I want them to be impressed by my cooking skills, and also I want them to have something to talk about. So I want to have some kind of stylish dish. So those are three different things, and I can think of different dishes that would address different impacts that I want to have. Right. So this is kind of the second level. The third level is basically thinking about what are the means that I'm trying to create to achieve those things. And can I do it with a simpler one? And there was a couple of strategies for that. And then even if that's even too big, you can still start and do prototyping. And there are a couple of prototype strategies that you can run even completely outside of product development, just prototyping strategies to even reduce those means. And with that, I haven't seen anything that you cannot break down into really work that is just a couple of days or maybe a week for a team.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Vivek, before you get on to the next one, so maybe what I could visualize is, so one of the projects, or maybe even why do I get into our project? Maybe in a general, say e-commerce website also. For an example, Amazon app, if someone is building. So if you want to also slice down, or maybe you even want to check on the impact mapping, or maybe the risk kind of a thing, maybe what we want to do is, or when we talked about even prototyping. So for an example, first we say we target one particular country, and we want to see what are the kind of the features, or what are the functionalities, or what we want to build for that particular country. And now then, once that works, maybe on top of that, maybe introduce another country. So similar manner, maybe prototyping could be done. So I mean, it could apply for I mean, at different levels for different organizations or projects. It could be at a solution level. Maybe one solution, if you want to replicate on different sites or locations, or maybe if they want to target maybe slice at a country level, and then solutions will come under it, or maybe solutions wherein countries could come under it, right? So maybe that could also help people to maybe think in a direction, okay, at least if you want to prototype, stick to one kind of a solution that you want to maybe release, and see how it works for different kind of locations. Or maybe you target one country, see how that solution works on that, and then we may want to put across other countries. So that could also is something that we can think about when we are doing slicing, because as you rightly mentioned, that will give an idea for the people to see how that end result look like, or maybe what are the risks that people will face, or maybe will they come across, or what are the things that we want to avoid when we go for the next one, right? So maybe that is what I'm able to relate to when you talked about maybe these are the different ways of doing it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. And the level that you were talking about right now, the country level, is this first type of slicing, right? So when you
Yes.
try to slice while looking into whom are you addressing, right? But then you can, even if you're talking about such a huge product as Amazon, you can think about how do I want to address all the people, say in India, right? And then you can think about, well, actually, I guess people in India is still way too big, right? You would say, how do I
Yes.
want to address single moms in India? How do I want to address single teenagers in India who want to buy something on Amazon? And then you will come up with very different kind of impacts that you want single moms to have when they are buying at your shop. You maybe want them to feel secure, or you want them to feel um, to know very well upfront when their shipment is going to happen, because that's a kind of, so there is so many different impacts, and then depending on the impact, there's so many different means you can think of. And and what we're doing right now is basically a structured way, and this is, I'm not sure how well it works for our listeners, because this is something I would typically recommend people to have visually in front of them, because
Correct.
it's just so much easier if you have any kind of visual tool to visualize this, that gives you what I call the map. In fact, I think it's a very beautiful picture. What you want to have if you are building an organization in an unclear environment, you basically are like the captain of a ship in the 17th century, right? You have a general idea where you want to go, but then there is all of those different kinds of ocean and whatever happens in front of you. You have a map that is quite incomplete, and the weather changes every day. And you want to know, okay, today, right now, where are we steering our ship? In what direction? And tomorrow, maybe we will have to steer in a different direction because the weather has changed, and we want to omit all those waves and or those I don't know, islands or rifts or that could break my ship. And so this is kind of so creating such a map. This is what we just talked about. This is what we this is the visualization, and this is what you need the skill for. Just basically create the map, and then you guide your ship by by choosing a direction for today, saying, okay, we go into this direction. And the third thing that typical captain has is basically a tool to find out where am I, right? They use stars. They used to use stars for that kind of thing, right? And this is what feedback looks like, right? So the feedback, when we build something, getting feedback is actually telling me where am I? Have I actually improved the experience of my clients with my product, or have I not? Have I actually moved the needle anyhow? And those three things is basically what we need, right? We need a map, we need to be able to set direction, and we need to find out have we moved and how far.
Yes,
Yeah.
completely aligned to that. And I think, Ramit, thanks for bringing up that example. I think that becomes much more easier for everyone, or maybe for our audience as well, to relate to how it fits the context.
Mhm.
And since we were also talking about the maybe based on those four things of slicing, right? Maybe I think, or I believe, or in some way you might have answered this question, but I think I would like to still certainly
Mhm.
validate in certain way, is like, how can organizations prioritize their work to maximize the value delivery? I mean, in the context that you gave, in terms of whom are we
Mm.
addressing, right? Or maybe the prototype, or maybe the means. So how do you think, is there a way, or is there a technique
Mhm.
that we can still say that let's prioritize our work
Mhm.
in the value delivery aspect? Would you
Yeah.
like to talk about that?
Sure. Thank you. So there is a couple of things. So first, I want to maybe again mention something that is maybe obvious to all of us, but it's actually really non-obvious because, at least in my experience in most organizations, because there is something we call the Pareto rule, right? The 80-20 rule that
I was about to
80.
talk about that when you said that
Yeah,
we are not using 80% of the stuff lying in the
yeah,
production or whatever, right? So I was just about to plug in that itself.
yeah. Actually, Amazon is actually a very good example. The amount of products they kill that they invested time in, but that's a little bit different. Now, the Pareto rule is something everyone knows about. Like every project manager knows 80-20, 80-20. Let's do something 80-20. But the point is, it's not that simple. You cannot do most things. So let's dial down. I noticed that I'm so motivated to give everything to you. I'm speaking a little too fast. Okay, so if we slow down a little. So basically 80-20 rule says in most circumstances you get 80% of the impact from 20% of the effort that you used. So for example, when you let's come back to the simple example of cooking. You can say I have um, one horizontal activity, cleaning a knife or cleaning all the knives. And I do it 80-20. What does that mean? I just look at the places that are dirty and I basically clean it up. And the knives look more or less clean. I've cleaned them 80-20. Should you now cook something with such a knife? Not a good idea, right? Not a
No.
good idea. No, you're gonna get infected at some point if you do that. You actually want to clean your knife 100% because that's not where you want to do 80-20. So a horizontal thing is not something where you want to do something 80-20. That's actually low quality that you will get. You'll get a toxic, but potentially toxic meal. Now, let's take a different example. Something most people know is remote control for a TV, right? How
Mhm.
many buttons does it have? Right? So typical remote control will have 30, 40 buttons, right? How many of them do we use 90% of the time?
No.
Right? Five at most, right? So imagine how I mean, I don't know how it was created. I know that before there was remote controls that we know now, there were remote controls that actually had a cable going to the TV. But however it was created, I imagine there must have been a phase where they basically analyzed what kind of things does a person want to do with a TV. And before that, there was already TVs, but you had to, walk your way to the TV to change
Correct.
anything, right? So so someone has analyzed, and then they've designed a remote control that would have all of those buttons and do everything that came up in the analysis. Then they would implement this remote control with all those 30 buttons, and then they would deliver it to us, and we would say, well, okay, this is a remote control. It does the work. But actually, what we need is a remote control with 5 buttons. In order to get there, you need a different process. You don't have a place to identify those 20% in this analyze, plan, deliver process. You can do it, however, if you actually slice it differently. If you first created a remote control with just a button for on and off, and you look whether it helps people not to stand up from their sofas when they watch TV. And you will realize, well, some people actually, don't need to stand up anymore, but they still do a lot. So then you create those 2 buttons for program, the next program, and the one program back, and you realize even fewer people are standing up. And then you create those 2 buttons, you add those 2 buttons for volume, and suddenly you notice people don't need to stand up anymore from their sofas. They are actually happy. And that's when you say, okay, our remote control is good enough, right? So with this long example, what I wanted to say is, in order for us to be able to leverage this 80-20 rule, we need to be able to slice work differently and to deliver it in a piece-by-piece manner. We can still say that we do something 80-20 as a project manager, but what we will have in the end is low quality, which is actually what I've heard from many project managers, that they're very careful about saying the 80-20, because they have made their experiences of hidden low quality problems that are hidden within the product. And we are really not about creating low quality products when we're doing agile things, right? We're creating high quality for the features that actually matter. And in order for us to be able to do that, again, slicing is so important. So that's basically, it's kind of it's from my point of view, it's really at the bottom of every little thing that we expect to happen when we do anything agile. This is, I think, in American English, it's kind of where the rubber hits the road. This is the slice, basically. We can talk about a lot of things, but the rubber hits the road when we talk about what results are going to be done, and when we can
Wow.
split them into really small pieces.
Wow, amazing. I love the example that you gave. I mean, that's so relatable, and we can easily visualize those things, right? So great, maybe way of explaining those things. And you brought up a point on quality, right? So that's where that's what caught my attention. So
Mm.
I just want to know, I mean, why is maintaining high quality important in the context of slicing work, and what are some
Mm.
effective techniques for maintaining high quality in work structures?
Yeah. So this is where it gets hard. This is where most organizations that actually like the idea of, oh yeah, right, let's get to agile and all that stuff. This is where working in this way actually matters, not just to how you manage work, but what you actually do on a daily basis. Because when you are delivering um, when you are delivering a product in small increments, and you need to ensure that every increment has high quality. You basically need to have your quality assurance processes that are otherwise only happening once in the end of your project and take months. You need to do them very often and very frequent. And that's when actual practices change. And that's very often where resistance also arises, right? So, so there is a part of book devoted to basically giving examples for what are typical practices once teams start to check the quality of their results frequently. What are the typical things that then appear to make it easier, right? So in software, we know we basically automate a lot of tests, right? So to reduce the manual testing. But when we talk about, for example, delivering new processes and organizations that still need to comply with some government regulations, right? So say we change some kind of process, and we still need the new process to be compliant. What we find out is going through the whole compliance checklist would still take us weeks or months. We can't do that every week or every sprint. However, actually the whole list doesn't matter. What we change in this process in our project is typically only 5%, is only, it has only a meaning for 5% of this whole list. So let's create our own simplified compliance list. It's a much smaller checklist that we will then get through. Or very often in projects, costs play a role, right? So people need to figure out whether the current prototype is still kind of cost-wise below some kind of threshold that cannot be overrun. And so they create some little Excel sheets or basically spreadsheets helping them estimate costs. Typically something that would take a lot of time, but once they ask themselves the question, so what do we need in order to be able to do that within a couple of hours, people come up with very small tools that help them actually ensure quality frequently. And that is, just so that's why it's a topic that should not be omitted. It's very often something which we don't talk about because that actually creates resistance. But I think it's only fair because and it is actually good to speak about it because it creates less kind of less subconscious resistance. The resistance is conscious. We can talk about it, and in the end, it's much easier to get to get on with an adoption with a change within an organization. Yeah.
Yes. And I think the example that you gave is a classic example of most of the teams who pretend or who call themselves that we are working in agile, but obviously where we talk about quality, the quality is compromised when the teams talk about quality in the later stages when most of the work is done, and then they go and test or maybe do manual process, or there are maybe half written test cases or unit testings and all those stuff. So obviously when you talk about that's a major concern that most of the team have in terms of the quality aspect. uh, and now maybe moving on, I have a maybe one question at this point of time is like,
Mhm.
moving forward, how do you see the future about or you see this is how
Mhm.
the work is going to evolve in terms of the slicing up of work within
Mhm.
organizations and industries. People will adapt more about this, will start evolving in this process and practice more now.
Mm. This is definitely my hope. So I think so the one part is right. So what do I see the development? Generally, I don't think that the need for adaptability is going anywhere for organizations. So if anything, what we are doing industry-wise in the whole world is basically automate everything that can be automated, either by software or by robots. So everything that is left for us to do, for us humans to do, is actually to use our adaptability at the places of work. This is more and more what we are being paid for, right? So this skill that we're talking about, and I'm not just talking about slicing work, but I'm talking managing systems that are adaptable, is definitely the skill for this century. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I'm saying this. Everything that is everything that is automatable, we will automate. This is what happens in the capitalism world, because it just doesn't make sense in the long term to not automate something that can be automated. So everything that can be automated is something predictable. The things that are left are not predictable. So dealing with this is definitely needed, and it's needed in more and more organizations completely outside of software. We so some so when I work with government agencies, they don't do that because they want to. Government is actually typically doing things that are very same thing. This is what government is good at, right? Register another citizen at a new address, something that happens 10 millions of times every year, right? They're not changing things or trying to become adaptable because because of for any philosophical reason. They realize, well, wars break out much more frequent. They need to adapt to changes in climate. They need to be able to become more responsive to what their citizens are doing. right? And if you want to become more responsive to what your citizens are asking you to do, well, you need to create some processes that are kind of responsive, right? And that happens. This is just a government example. This happens everywhere. So I think the skill is definitely important, and I really hope that we are able to. So there is one pain that I have with in our agile world, and this pain is that we often talk about, there is a company and they've been able to do something really great, like Spotify. They're doing great jobs, and then we're creating a Spotify model, right? We're taking every great example, and suddenly we talk about it like it's God given. But that's not enough. That's not good enough. Our industry has been existing for over 30 years. We need to be able to create in a reliable fashion conditions where people work self-organized. It doesn't have it should not be mystical anymore. It should become something much more reliable, much more professional, much more clear. And I think professionalizing this part of our work, the slicing of work, is a very basic thing. If we can professionalize it, I believe this is definitely one step, one part of it, of creating of changing our industry to make it more reliable so that we can create reliable adaptive organization, that it's not a mystery or a fairy tale or few companies around the world, but it's generally a normal thing to have. That's at least what I hope will happen. And yeah, that's what I want to
Absolutely.
contribute to a little bit.
And you kind of opened up a conversation, maybe a topic for doing another podcast by talking about picking up things from here and there and trying to look out. And also, in a way, you also gave out the answer for the people who fear that our jobs will be lost to AI and this and that. When you
Mhm,
said that wherever there is wherever there is a need for managing the systems, our
mhm,
jobs are not going to go anywhere, and that's
mhm,
what we are here for. I mean, not for maybe obviously automation can happen wherever it can, but our jobs cannot be automated, right? And our jobs cannot be taken
mhm,
over. So you also answered in a way for the people who are worrying about their jobs. And also when you brought in a point of maybe doing Spotify, right? We happen to do
mhm,
a podcast with a guest, Cliff Hazel, who was part of Spotify for long
mhm,
tenure, and that's exactly what he said, that just because Spotify has done, people have blindly, copy pasting it, and
mhm,
we need not copy paste it blindly. Just see if that is applicable to your context, that fits your context or not, because that was the way of working for Spotify. That does
mhm,
not mean that's a framework that needs to be just copy pasted for other organizations also. And I completely agree to your point. And since you talked about maybe adaptability, right? So I
mhm,
want to just close this conversation with a last question.
mhm,
What advice would you give to the organizations looking to embrace a more flexible and adaptable approach to their work structures?
mhm. So definitely look into what are the risks that we are facing. Be honest about that and try to come up with what could be results that we all can look at that actually reduce the risk or prove that we can deliver some value. If we can if you can focus on this part, if you can focus on what are the results that we're delivering, you will automatically ask yourselves the pragmatic good questions. You will automatically have pragmatic discussions that will help you and help you find the the right balance in your particular situation. And yeah, keep being focused on that. That is the key thing to do.
Wow, amazing piece of advice, I would say, Anton. And thank you so much for coming over and doing this podcast with us. We really loved the conversation, and you literally opened up few blocks of brain, of my brain at least, which I did not even think of. I mean, for an example, I, you gave us the new perspective to think on slicing of work. So honestly, when we were working on maybe the questions, or maybe trying to understand or wrap our head around,
Mhm,
to come up with the questions. So we were thinking,
mhm,
what do we ask? How many questions do we have on this topic, and what do we
mhm,
ask? And we were like, no, no, no. we literally made so many drafts of questions saying that no, this is wrong, this is wrong. And finally, whatever we had, we chose those questions just
Mhm,
for us to even understand, I mean, what can we get out of this conversation. And
mhm,
trust me when I say this, we really got a lot out of these conversations, and you really opened up
mhm.
so many thinking doors in terms of slicing the work. So thank you so much for doing this. We
Thank you
really
so much,
enjoyed the
Ramya.
conversation.
Thank you so much, Ramya. Thank you, Vivek. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Anton.
I'm glad I could help.
Thank you so much for watching this episode patiently till the end. We hope you enjoyed the episode. We'll meet you again in the next episode. Till then, if you like our podcast show, then do like, share, subscribe, and let us know your feedback in the comment section. You can also listen to the episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Audible. Thank you.